First I want to introduce you.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So everyone, this is Brian Schwab. You've heard his name many times during this course, since we have been using some material from his book from 2009, and also since we have been discussing some of the games that he has been making. So Brian is joining us from London, and will talk to us about fun in games, fun in AI, psychology, stuff like that. So welcome, Brian.
All right. Thank you very much, by the way. All right. I'm going to try and quickly share my screen and do that whole nonsense so that we can get past that part of the universe. Okay.
Oh,
can you see it now?
Yes, indeed. We have lots of image.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Okay. So today I mostly just want to talk to you folks about some stuff you probably know a good chunk of deal about already, especially if Mirjam is doing her job, which I know she will. My name is Brian, like she said. I've been doing interactive silliness for a very long time. Early 90s, started in the video game industry, mostly gameplay and AI. I've done games all over the place, educational games, sports games, RTS. I did a location-based ride. I did an arcade title where you were a Tyrannosaurus Rex, all sorts of nuttiness. My last game was Hearthstone. I was the AI and gameplay guy for that. After I left Blizzard, I went to a company doing a spatial computer called Magic Leap, and I was the director of a research group called the Interaction Lab there. We did a lot of experiential exploration as well as sort of like system tests. We were in the system engineering group, and so it was a new computing medium, craziness. And then when I left there, I ended up over here in the UK, and now I work at Lego in a group called the Creative Play Lab, which is essentially the innovation part of Lego, where we try to find new ways to play in general and new ways to play with Lego in specific, I guess you could say. So the reason I'm here is because I have found over the years that making fun, while very fulfilling as a job, is actually quite hard, right? Humans are a very odd group in general. And a lot of the things that they like are very conflicting. It's very difficult to make fun for a single human being, much less for large groups of them. And part of the reason is because we're actually overpowered creatures, right? Like our brain doesn't just handle enough computing to just make us survive. We have hugely vibrant extra chunks of brain power that like let us have a overactive imagination and do all sorts of nutty thinking. And because of that, we spend an inordinate amount of our time like exploring our world in various directions simply because we have those spare cycles. And the way we do a lot of that exploration is either through science, hard science in a dungeon somewhere, or or we try to play. We try to engage in some manner with our lives and ourselves and the surroundings that we find ourselves in. And a lot of times, because of all that extra compute, we find ways that we can actually not just sort of like survive again, but to like actually find joy and happiness, right? But if you're gonna make it easier for people to do that, if you're gonna make it easier for yourself to do that, you really need to understand, you know, all aspects of like the people that you're trying to build stuff for, and how play works with the human mind and all of that, if you really want to like reach as many people as you can. So I'm gonna try and touch on a couple of subjects, and I'm not going to be going super deep because we're going to move pretty quickly, right? But I'll try to keep it somewhat labeled as to like the depth level that you're going to get, right? And so but just know that like I'm more trying to like hit on certain things that I think are important as opposed to be, exhaustive in any given manner, right? Over the course of all the years of working in AI and gameplay and dealing with human beings in general, the the way that I keep coming back to like how I think of most people's brains is this very, very simplistic phrase: statistical efficiency engines, right? We are basically like machines, at least our brains are. Our brains are sort of like nerve level machines that are like very, very efficient at taking historical data and try to making a model, a world view out of that data so that we can figure out what the heck we're supposed to do going forward. And we're hugely efficient at not only doing this job, but we become more efficient creatures because we have all this data and these worldviews that like let us make decisions really fast, right? If you try to get a computer to do the same exact thing, you end up with the same sort of stuff, right? Like here's a quick example. I have a set of data here. If you're a mathematician or you're in 5th grade, you probably recognize that this is roughly a sine wave. And we can give a bunch of random data to a computer even, and knowing that it is a sine wave in reality, we can sort of say, okay, start with nothing, right? The red line is what the computer's internal model, and we can make it adjust itself based on the ground truth, the green that we've given it. And it can kind of, oh, okay, yeah. And it's like, oh, you're not there yet. Keep going. And it'll eventually adjust itself down to where its world model sort of roughly meets the data, right? The thing I will say is that like if you keep going, right, because this data doesn't exactly match a sine wave, and if I keep having the computer push statistically towards getting this data set exactly, you end up with something like this, right? And in AI, we call this overfit, right? The AI system has found an exact function that hits all of its data points exactly, but obviously it's overcomplicated its model of like how this data is sort of in space. And if I give it any more data points, it's probably not going to do very well, right? Because it's going to give me some point on that red line, which doesn't actually follow the green line anymore. Funnily enough, in human terms, this exact thing, if I gave somebody a little bit of data and put them in the woods and didn't give them any more, they would have roughly the same internal model in some cases of certain world happenings. And we would call these people like conspiracy theorists, right? They've invented some well overcomplicated system of logic, quote unquote, that makes the reality fit exactly the tiny little bit of data that they've gotten. And so the way you fix that with a person, right, is to give them more friends, give them more points of view, let them have more data. And that's actually the exact way you would fix a computer that's overfit as well, right? You would give it more training data so that it's not learning the very specific things in here. It's learning the green line, the more generic sort of notion, right? And the reason I bring this up, that humans and computers somewhat have the same problem, is because we are the statistical efficiency engines. I have this particular shirt on, it says gradient descent on it, and it's got a guy skiing, because that's really actually a really good notion. Is like human beings are this statistically, we're always trying to shrink wrap down onto like whatever data set we're given, right? It makes us beautifully kind of like adaptive to whatever universe we're at, but it's not really all that intelligent of a process. It really is more sort of like skiing down a hill. It's very, very gravitationally kind of like keeps going, and because of that, it's because we like to get it right, like we want to be as powerfully smart as possible, whether we have almost no data or whether we have a lot of data. The only way that people actually tend to like work and not always get kind of conspiracy theoritorial is that we tend to like a lot of different ways of being right, and that tends to help us by like having some things be opposite, so you end up fighting against each other and you have this conflict that kind of causes an equilibrium. A couple of concepts that help with this is sort of like regression versus prediction, right? Regression means that you're just sort of seeing patterns in the data and you can kind of like figure out generalize the patterns. So like I don't need to see every chair in the world in order to find something to sit on. I just have to kind of learn about the concept of a chair, and then I can kind of look around and go, is there something around here that I could sit on? And I could probably find something, even if it's a giant block of ice or something that's not a chair at all. On the other side, I have predictive power, right? I have the ability to sort of simulate what's going to happen in my head, and then make better decisions based on that simulation, so that I can maybe figure out if something really bad is going to happen ahead of time and not do it at all. And so, like, should I maybe not sit on that block of ice? What's going to happen? I might slide off. And given the fact that that block of ice is right here on the side of this big cliff, that's maybe a bad idea, right? The interesting thing is that regression is mostly about speed. Prediction is mostly about accuracy. And those two things are like largely at odds with each other to a certain extent, right? Like, in order to have a more accurate predictive model, I'm probably taking more things into account, and it's not quite as fast. It's not quite as sort of generalizable, you know. And likewise, if I have this nice fast model, I'm probably not the most accurate predictor. And so I find a good mix in this conflict, right? But what the hell does this have to do with fun? The big thing is that, yes, cognition is very key to us, you know, being the dominant life on the planet. But having fun with all this extra horsepower is really actually where there's a lot of fun to be had. It's kind of like if, you know, you have like a little vehicle that you can drive between your house and the grocery store. That's how you survive. But like, if that little car that you drive between here and the grocery store just happens to be, you know, a supersonic jet, that's kind of a massive waste of that jet, right? Like you just want to open it up from time to time and do some barrel rolls, right? But like, that's this beautiful tool that we all have within us that we want to play with, and we can play with if we really explore it. But that hot rodding, that ability to kind of like have fun with the extra power that you have, really requires you to kind of understand how things work. If you don't, you know, if you jump in that jet and just jam on the gas pedal, you're probably going to go flailing off into a mountain or who knows what, right? And that's not fun. That's probably more like joyriding, and that usually ends up launched into a tree somewhere or whatever. What you really want to do is like learn the equipment, learn yourself, learn the things, so that you can actually have fun with all this extra juice that you've got, right? That's what I mean by hot rodding, not just sort of like letting rip. So let's take a step back. What exactly do I mean by fun? I think if I like walked around the room right now and asked folks, everybody would give me some notion as to what fun was. My guess would be that I would have a vast pile of different notions. In fact, given that I'm American and you're all Swedish or some flavor, I would probably expect wildly different notions of fun in many cases. And that's cool. But even when I really get into the specifics of what fun is, I think it starts to get kind of hazy really, really fast. You know, is it something you do? You know, do you use your body or your mind to do certain things, and that's what fun is? Or is it something you feel, right? And where do I feel it? If it is it in my head? You know, is it emotional? Do I feel it in my gut? Like it's an ache? Like what exactly is fun? Is it some mixture of these? And likewise, is it for kids? You know, like tricks? Is it something that you used to do, and now that you've grown up and you learn the rules, you don't need to anymore? And it's not something that adults do, or it's not serious. It's frivolous, and it's not necessary anymore. Honestly, like these are the kinds of questions that I think that like you start to see a vast variance in like people's notions about what fun is and where it comes from and how they can make best use of it or not, and whether or not it's for them or not. It's a really interesting thing in that even if you go back and try to figure out what exactly humans meant in general by the word fun, you very quickly find some very hilarious things, which is, in Middle English, there's actually two primary meanings for the origin of what the word that we currently use, fun. First is fun, right? Which is foolish or silly, kind of goofy, right? Or fonen, which is to make a fool of or to joke around with, right? You know, and so and the interesting thing about it is if you look at both of those are actually just the tiniest bit negative to a certain extent, right? Like, one is seen as being silly or goofy or not really useful, and the other one is potentially like sort of passively attacking you, right? And so even at a cultural level, the word fun itself has the tiniest bit of kind of like negative is almost too strong of a word, but there's definitely a kind of stigma here, right? Where fun is maybe something for kids. It isn't maybe serious, or it is a very personal thing and we don't talk about it. Or whatever it is. The point being that, like, even from an entomological level, it's not something that is crisply defined, or that really makes a ton of sense given like what a lot of us do for a living in some cases. And I actually have taken it one step further. I don't actually believe that it's for kids. I don't actually believe that like it's these hazy things. I've spent an enormous amount of time thinking about it, and I've come up with a very, very reductive formula that I use on a fairly regular basis. The first is a fun is about 60% playful. This is the system, right? This is the set of rules that lets you know the bucket in which you are currently in, that you can try to have fun with, right? It's the boundaries of your world. And let's say you're talking about Super Mario. The rules of that system are is that I can push the one button and jump. I can push another button and I can run. I can use the joystick to go left or right. I can land on things and squash them unless they have a spike on them, and then when it hurts, blah blah blah. There's power ups. That system is the system of rules that lets me know what I can and can't do in this world, and they're largely playful. Obviously, you can have rule sets out there that aren't completely playful, but for my particular formula of fun, I'd say 60% of the system should be, or excuse me, 60% of the overall mixture of things in any given fun thing is the system. About 30% amusing. And what that actually ends up being is that's safety, right? Now I know the rules of the world, and now I have a safe place to jump around and explore. And if I fall on my face, yeah, there's real consequences, but they're fun consequences, like I get a wah wah wah, and then I start over again. Or my brother on the chair next to me starts laughing, and that's funny, and we laugh at each other. It provides that sort of level of safety that now that I know the world rules, I have some place to explore. I can spend my time actually like learning and mastering my skills, and I don't have to feel too pressured or that like this is my job and therefore if you fail you're fired, right? And the last 10% is surprising, because we love shock and awe. I said earlier that we love to be right. Our brains love to be right, but that doesn't mean that we don't like to have our expectations twisted just a tiny bit, right? The entire concept of humor is around taking expectations and kind of giving them a little purple nurple at the very end, right? And the reason why is because it's kind of fun. It's kind of playful to kind of at the very last second go whoop and give that predictor just a little bit of like, oh, right? And that 10% is to me, it's kind of the magical 10%. And the funny thing is people sometimes come to me and they're like, I'm actually shocked that it's only 10%, right? But the thing you got to remember about surprising is that it's actually stochastic. It sort of is like not something you could predict. That's the whole point. That's why it's surprising. And so yes, on average, some people love more surprise and some people love less. But in the general human scheme of things, I've found that between 10 and 15% of the fun formula is around surprise. If you get more than that, it tends to underride, some of the safety. You start to feel less safe because you're not quite sure whether you're going to get zapped by the randomness or not. And so it suddenly goes from delightful randomness to I'm worried about it randomness, to potentially even I feel danger randomness, right? And as soon as you don't have safety, then suddenly it's difficult to explore your system and the whole fun kind of unravels, right? And so that's the reason why the randomness is low, not because I hate random games, but because in general, what I have found is that for any given fun formula, this is the mixture that I have found that the vast majority of people enjoy, myself included. And finally, I bring this up because this is sort of the contact between brains and human beings, and all of the game stuff we're going to talk about as well. And that's interactivity itself, right? Like this is a very basic concept. I don't have to explain this to you, right? It's just an interaction loop where we've got some inputs and some outputs and a thing in the middle that thinks about it and then potentially adjusts their outputs, and onward we go, right? And this is very simple in theory, but like all things simple in theory, the devil is in the details. You could spend an entire lifetime thinking about all of the different craziness that's going to go into the input bucket, right? After 15 years of being a hardcore gameplay programmer and designer, I could almost tell you what type of temporal signal is going through a particular thing just based off of what I would almost call the texture of the inputs as they come out. And I'm like watching a log, and I'm like, oh, that's going to feel nice and smooth. That's going to feel rough. That's going to be static. That's going to feel this way. That's going to feel this way. At the output level, as a game content person, we live our lives in the output. Like, what's the art style of the game, and where are we asking people to look and focus their attention on, and what's the granularity of the things that we're asking them to pay attention to, and at what pace is things happening here? You know what I mean? And can they tell the good stuff from the bad stuff, or the important stuff from the background? The world of detail inside of the output bucket is monstrous. There's millions of people on the planet right now that concern themselves with the output bucket, right? And lastly, like, at any given point, you have to consider your audience and figure out, like, do they have the skills to really do the things we're saying as far as input, and make use of the output that we're giving them? There's a huge amount of stuff going on down here that we need to take into account, and either at the AI level, knowing what you're trying to model for your opponents or your companions or what have you, or even building a model of what the person is doing so that you can more nuance their input and more affect the output you're trying to give them. Also, remember that, like, the audience in this particular loop could be a single person who I've given a joystick to and they're pushing left and making Super Mario rotate, or it could be an entire audience for a game, and I'm adjusting a single unit in Clash of Clans, and it's causing thousands of games to change, which then we do the analysis on what that means as far as the entire population of people playing that game goes, and that becomes this large monstrous interaction loop that's operating at month iteration time scale versus second to second of a gameplay core loop for a single game. So let's dive in a tiny bit to the audience, right? Like whether, again, you're talking about a single person or an entire population, there's a huge number of, like, just very, very boring things that you could talk about, right? Just like the difference between any two populations of people. You could talk about all of these things between you and your next door neighbor as well, right? But in addition to all of the boring list, there's also this just enormous amount of individual differences and preferences and tastes and fads and all sorts of crazy stuff. And that list is so huge that we tend to, like, not completely dive into that at all. What we end up doing is we build a lot of archetypes that we try to, like, get large groups of people somewhat to kind of, like, get a sense as to, like, how we can service some of what they want or don't want, right? And so, like, even the settings that we make our experiences in, setting being the time, place, some of the general rules, special allowances like magic exists, and, like, known restrictions, let's say like you're underwater or something, right? Just by making settings, we can very quickly get people into various things that they either like or they don't like, and they can self-select a bit, right? So if I say, oh, I like fantasy, that usually means I kind of like medieval, but it also means I like maybe magic and monsters, right? There's additional stuff in some of these archetypes that aren't in others, and so I can quickly kind of not have to teach the universe to everybody every time I want to try and reach an audience. I can use some of these archetypes. And likewise, we have archetypes in every other direction as well, right? We have gameplay archetypes, whether you're, like, really, really about playing a role in a story, or you're just simulating something that we all know, or you want to do real-time action, or you want to do turn-based action, or you want, musical or what, right? We can divide up the player space in a million different ways. This one I've just written up here because it represents a way of tearing them apart, right? Are you a wanderer and you just like exploring and finding new stuff? Are you a conqueror and you have to win all the time, right? Like, just knowing the types of audiences that you're trying to reach out lets you engage in interaction loops differently for all these different people, right? Like, how do they like to progress the game? How do they like to progress the story? What do they do with social connectivity as far as this game is concerned? Like all of these notions are largely based on the setting and the type of game and the players that you're talking about, right? Even the way various people like to use their brains is potentially bucketed into several different ways, right? Like you're a SimCity player and you just absolutely adore resource management in 12 dimensions over the course of weeks. Whereas other people just really, really want to negotiate between various factions, right? And they just want to like have complicated social craziness that's going on. There's enormously more ways of archetyping and splitting up the audiences and thinking about all these things, right? But what does all this get us? It gets us back to that place again, where if we do all these things, right? If we know our audience, if we know what we can teach in a reasonable time, if we consider how they feel already and how we want them to feel, we give them these worlds, these powerful abilities without asking too much of them, right? And we make that world be safe and consistent with some fun surprises so that they'll keep coming back and seeing what else they can find because they know that they're safe in there, right? Then we have that fun that we're looking for, not just for them, but for us as well, because we can get to the point where we do know our audience, we do know these things, and we can have fun actually working on this stuff, right? And so as an example, I kind of want to talk about Hearthstone just a little bit, so that we can I can show you a little bit of this exact sort of notion in practice, right? And so Hearthstone was actually a very small team. It was an experiment at Blizzard. The average team size was like between 60 and 100 plus at Blizzard, and we were more like 11, 12 some odd people. And so there was 5 programmers and 4 artists and a sound guy and 2 designers and da da da. There was a few other folks, and we had this interesting dev cycle, which was that we all kind of got hired on. We started, and then almost all of us went off to go finish StarCraft 2. Blizzard used to do that a lot, where like when a game was slightly behind, they would like pull everybody from other parts of the company and they would just sort of all pile onto a particular product. And so we all kind of jammed away on StarCraft 2 for about a year, believe it or not. And during that time, the 2 people that were actually mostly focused on Hearthstone full time was still Eric Dodds, who's the primary programmer, or excuse me, primary designer, and Ben Brode, who was the secondary designer. They were full time on the project, and the rest of us were sort of like in a near constant chat channel, trying to do ideas and such and such. And then on like 2 to 3 times a week, we would go upstairs for lunch as a team and kind of like play through a paper prototype. And so we probably did a few hundred paper prototypes. We had just piles of paper printed out because it was like Hearthstone is a card game based on a physical card game, where you put down cards and you do combat stuff, and so it was easy for them to kind of like just print stuff out on a printer, and then we could like come upstairs and we could like try out various things that we had been talking about in the chat. And we did this for a long, long time while we were finishing up StarCraft. And the beautiful thing about that is that it allowed us to actually get really, really sturdy and strong on like what type of game we were trying to make and what type of contracts we were trying to build with the players, right? And so the actual design pillars, by the time we actually got to production of Hearthstone, were not just known, they were actually fairly well tested, because we had like done so much prototyping around early notions that we had really honed in on them. And so the design pillars for Hearthstone were, it was a game. We were trying to make a game for a much larger audience than trading card games enjoyed at that moment, right? There was almost a stigma, even inside Blizzard. It was sort of funny. People would say, "Oh, what are you working on?" And we'd be like, "It's a card game," and they'd be like, "Card games." You never got like a horror face, because one of the things that Blizzard was actually really, really good about was like not nerd shaming. You know what I mean? They were very good about sort of like, yeah, if that's what you're into, cool, that's all good. But they were like, I don't know if that's for me, right? And we wanted to try and combat a little bit of that feel that we knew existed from trading card games in the past. We wanted to keep it deep. We knew that trading card games were a particular blend of kind of like, play that we wanted to largely retain if possible. Obviously, we knew we had to simplify quite a bit in order to get to a more large audience. We wanted to make it physical because the game itself started out as a physical game where you were moving cards, you were, slapping things down in front of your opponent's face directly and kind of pointing at them and laughing. And it was a very, very physical game. And we wanted to maintain a lot of that when we took it into the computer. We wanted to maintain a lot of the Warcraft flavor, right? There is a lot of humor in Warcraft, even with all of the epic power and kind of like abilities that everybody has. There's a level of amusement and a level of kind of soft, playful exploration that like Warcraft all by itself brings, and it also brings that epic feel, is right. And so we really wanted to like keep that epic flavor, and we also wanted to keep kind of like the kind of like playfulness of card games as a flavor as well, right? And so that was a big thing. Play fast. We had recognized that like a lot of Blizzard's games were very weighty. It took them an hour to play and sometimes more, and gaming in general was going much more in the notion of kind of like more mobile snackable gaming, and we were trying to say, can we get to a point where games are nice and fast, because those tend to be more accessible games. People have more time in their lives for that kind of thing, and they also like can then iterate more and be involved in the conversation of interactive games in general more, right? And then lastly, the big one that we really believed in, and it's one of the reasons why I was okay with kind of talking about, even though it's an older game at this point for this particular talk, is that fun was actually one of our biggest kind of like points, is that we wanted the game to be fun whether you win or lost, right? We kind of felt like whether if you can lose a game and still walk away and talk to your friend about it for 10 minutes and go, oh, that was great, I can't believe it, I thought I had you and you got me at the end, and and you have just as awesome of a story time when you lose as when you win, then not only does that keep people coming back, but it tends to, over the course of a game in total, it increases the fun across the board, instead of like all the negative always taking away from the positive. And the reason that we chose a lot of these design pillars is from all of our prototyping and testing and such, but also because over the course of the time we were playing a bunch of other trading card games, and there was a bunch of issues, right, that we were trying to fix. The classic Blizzard pattern of kind of like, let's take an established genre and let's see if we can hone it a bit, right? TCG games in general are very hard to play, right? Here's a card from Magic the Gathering. I'm going to quickly read it. You may draw 2 extra cards during your draw phase. If you do so, put 2 of the cards drawn this turn back on top of your library in any order, or pay 4 life per card not replaced. Effects that prevent or redirect damage cannot be used to counter this loss of life. Now, I have no idea what that card does, or if it's powerful, or if it's valuable, or if it's useful. I get a sense from having worked in a card game for a while and from being an AI person that like, okay, this card isn't really useful all by itself. Obviously, it requires it's effectively more like a clothes hanger upon which you attach other things, and the sum total of that structure is now going to wreak havoc upon my opponent. But it would take me, I don't know, weeks, right, of experimentation, of finding good combinations of my deck to kind of like combine with this particular coat hanger in order to make an outfit that's like worth my time. And even then, like, who is it going to work against, you know, and then how often am I going to have the resources and all the cards necessary, and now I've probably not played too many games in my life where it took me a couple of months to learn the entire game, much less the effectiveness of a single card. And Magic the Gathering has something on the order of over 25,000 plus cards, right? And so, and don't get me wrong, nobody plays with all of them, but this is an enormously difficult, I would call this card, you know, rule lawyer card, right? Like this is dangerous, close to like patent law kind of like thinking that like some people really enjoy, and it's a huge barrier to entry. And so we did an enormous amount of stuff, even just simplifying our cards for Hearthstone, to try and like say, you know what, we're only going to ever have maybe 7 words or less on any given card. And in fact, the first set we came out, I think we averaged only like 3 or 4, right? The average at this point now, and Hearthstone's been out for almost 10 years. And the average word count in Hearthstone is still only 11 words. And so they've done an enormously amount of good to try and keep that initial thought there. And I think it's the reason why it's still popular after so long. Over time, new units that come out will tend to be more powerful than others, and that's a like a live game problem in general. I don't know that Hearthstone has done a great job there. We did do a bunch of stuff like trying to make different ways to play so that one card wouldn't dominate all the universe, or some combo wouldn't dominate all the universe. There's multiple ways to play, which means that some cards just aren't even going to make any sense at all in certain variations and whatever. But like any turn-based game, you have this problem here of first turn advantage, right? Even chess, I've heard studies of chess in some cases having between 5 and in some cases even more percentage advantage to the first player. And the interesting thing is that I think this is one area where Hearthstone did do an enormous amount of good, in that we managed to find a mechanic called the coin that like really helped first turn advantage. We had an outside group did a fairly large study on a whole slew of games. I think it was like a couple hundred different games, and they found that Hearthstone actually has the least amount of first turn advantage of almost any turn-based game, which was pretty cool. And I think that really leads to the overall accessibility of the game, as well as sort of like the sort of like the feel that it's a safe space to jump into, because it's not like half the time I have to be on my super guard and half the time I'm easier. Another big problem with TCGs is that you not only have to play the game, but you have to build your deck in order to play the game, right? So you have this like whole deck building interface to make a deck, and then you can play the game. And especially if you're going to do a bunch of different play variants and different classes, you might end up having to build a lot of decks. And people maybe don't want to spend however many hours it takes, especially if you're not that kind of mentality, to like pour through a whole slew of different cards and build decks that are specifically built for blah, 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 blah. And so we had to make, more accessible ways that people could craft good decks and easier. And maybe it only takes a few clicks and they can kind of get there fast. And so this was a thing that didn't really exist before Hearthstone, was to try and like help people make these powerful decks and not feel quite so much like they needed to be the librarian in order to like know all of the things in order to make good stuff, right? And lastly, TCGs in general have an enormous amount of skill, but they also employ an enormous amount of luck in winning the games, in randomness, right? Which cards are going to come out of my deck at any given time, how much resources am I going to have in any given moment, and what's my opponent doing at the time. I might have this whole cool thing that I'm about to do, and they put something on the board that changes a rule that completely nukes everything I was thinking of doing. It won't even do anything anymore. There's an enormous amount of luck here, and that also tends to make them hard to play. Right? It also tends to make people not feel quite so safe. And so one of the things we did was we invested a lot into many different ways that we could mitigate some of the luck. But what we didn't do was eliminate the luck, the randomness. Hearthstone's actually a fairly random game. But what we did find when we dove into the nuance of like randomness in general was that there was randomness that like happened after you made a choice, and therefore the randomness potentially took away some of your choice, or maybe it supported it, but it also potentially took away from your choice. And then there was randomness that happened and then you made a choice, which at that point what it did was it gave you more options and then allowed you to be smart in your response to the randomness. And so we played with the formula of the types of randomness that we were employing and when it was employed, so that we were trying to like remove as much of the randomness that felt like it was taking away fun and it was taking away agency, and we would sort of supplement with the types of randomness that people felt more powerful around, more positive around. And so we didn't eliminate luck, we didn't eliminate randomness, because it does make for a much more exciting flashy game where things can go up and down and up and down, and it makes for more exciting comebacks and that kind of thing. But we didn't want to undermine that safety, like we were talking about before, with too much surprise, too much randomness. And so what we did was we affected the randomness in good ways. And so go back to the slide, the so what slide, with all of the points I made before. And if you look, know and respect your audience. That's what keep it physical is about, right? And keep it deep. We knew that the audience, if you were into card games, you expected kind of like a strong set of strategic combinatorics, and we wanted to maintain a little bit of that, and that's why our one of our design goals was keep it deep. We knew what we wanted to try and reach our audience wise, and so we knew we had to like make the game for everyone and play fast. That's because we're trying to like keep that point into account. We're in knowing how the audience will feel. That's when we're talking about physicality again, right? Like the feel of the card game and the feel of like the combat, and the feel of Warcraft while doing this somewhat silly card game is it's all about the feeling and the flavor of the physicality of the actions that you're taking. Give powerful abilities without asking too much. That comes back to the Warcraft flavor. You can talk about the different classes and the different spells and stuff that people are already used to as far as the Warcraft universe is concerned. But again, with Play Fast, we're now talking about, you don't have to know everything about being a warrior. You just have to understand the specific personality of play that warrior brings to the game at this point, and provide safe and consistent systems, fun prizes. That's a bunch of things, right? Like that's how we talk about the rule set that we're giving the players, so that it's nice and deep still, but it's still safe. We've got that nice Warcraft humor, and so you're not feeling like a toxic environment. You're feeling like it's a fun environment where you can be very powerful and still lose horribly, and it's still fun, right? And that talks to keep them coming back, which is win or lose, it's still fun, right? And so in review, making fun is hard, right? How our brain works, and even the nature of how we consider fun itself is sometimes at conflict with itself, right? And people's differences don't cause conflict, but like sometimes just having to have many different people's preferences available can sometimes cause some conflict. But when you embrace all of that conflict, when you really understand that, like, what you do when you take and you take in that conflict is that you allow your team to build a safe place to explore all of that weird conflict, all of that weird humanity, so that you can make that safe space for exploration, so that people can find the fun in there, so that you can find the fun and you can amplify it, and now all of your players can find the fun. And that's actually what's important, right? And it's not just for kids. This is a thing that has been shown to increase the health and the joy of the vast majority of people. And so fun is important, and it's not a frivolous thing, right? And so please go out there and make some fun, right? And so thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Bravo. Thank you so much. I was muted here, so you didn't hear the applause. There
That's
were
okay.
applause here in the room. So first I want to ask in the room if there are questions. Yes? What was your position specifically within the Hearthstone?
I was the AI and gameplay programmer, and so there was two of us, myself and Bob Fitch, were the server programmers on in the initial Hearthstone game, and so he did a lot of the database backend and kind of the integration with Unity and all of that, and then I was the gameplay, the primary gameplay engine and the AI system. We also had a tools programmer that helped me to like make the AI system more accessible to the designers. But I worked directly with both the tools guy and the designers to make sure that the AI system for Hearthstone was very sort of designer friendly. If you go on GDC, you can actually see I did a postmortem on Hearthstone back in 15, 14, and so I actually talk a little bit about the AI system for Hearthstone if you want to look into it more.
Cool. More questions? Yes.
Have you seen Marvel Snap? And what is your opinion?
Oh yeah. I'm still good friends with Broad, and I was involved in the Friends and Family beta alpha, like while he was making Snap, and so it's a great game, and Broad is a really good TCG player as well as designer, and so he has done an amazing job with that game, and so I'm actually super proud of him for it.
Yes, there is an applaud, but they're also in the back of the room now. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, there has been a couple of AI contests lately for creating AI for playing Hearthstone.
Yeah.
Have you seen them? What's your opinion of them, if you have seen them?
It's a beautiful game for doing it because some of the stuff that makes it really accessible to people actually makes it easier to do really good AI for. It was interesting when I was making the AI system for Hearthstone. Blizzard was still in the process of sort of like coming to a place where they like trusted AI. When you have an enormous army of like high quality designers in your game company, it's difficult for somebody to come in as an AI person and like have the designers all go, so it's all going to be what, you know what I mean? They I wouldn't say they're distrusting, but they didn't rely on much AI. Very few games in the system at Blizzard were AI centric even, right? And so the AI for Hearthstone was very specifically made to be kind of like intermediate or low intermediate level, and it was more because what they wanted people was to like just learn the system so they could get in and actually then start playing each other, right? But I had always told them, in fact, one of the things that I did when I left was I gave them like a 6-point process by which here's the different places and ways that you could very quickly amp this up. And given the number of people that were already playing Hearthstone by the time I left, they had all the data that they could ever need to like build AI systems that could use that data to like build really smart, meta sensitive AIs that could do really well. And so from what I've seen, the Hearthstone AIs have actually been pretty good, but that's very not surprising to me, right? Because the system was set up for almost to kind of like make it easy to do that, and the game itself is almost sort of set up to the point of where it would be easier to make a good Hearthstone AI than it would be to make like a Magic the Gathering AI, because that is a NP hard problem, pretty hardcore, right? And so I'm looking forward to seeing like the universe keep going in that direction, but like yeah, I'm not surprised at all by what I've seen.
Oh, more questions? I wanted to go back to one of the first bits that you said. You did this Brian's incredibly reductive fun formula. With the 60% playful and the 30% amusing and the 10% surprising.
Yeah.
Like, for how long have you been kind of working on that? And is that something that you use, like specifically, like when you work in teams?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think if it's kind of interesting, like it kind of came out of, believe it or not, a combination between working on games as well as working with larger and larger teams of people. And like when you really start to see that like building a good working team of people is dangerously similar to building a quality game that like has different roles and that you've got good lines of communication and whatever together, you can kind of see how suddenly you start taking really close stock of like how you're building game systems and like what makes them fun. And it ends up like then working really, really well with like teams and other things, right? And so it is definitely something that I think of a lot. The big one that is very easy to use is the surprise factor, where I say, like, would you say that this is it's surprising to the point of where you're still happy every time it happens, or have you gotten to the point where you're like, oh, son of a, you know what I mean? Like it's got me worried. Is that thing going to flash? And now, at which point then I'm like, okay, is that what we're going for? Because I mean, if you think about it, like if I make a system of rules where I'm like, okay, we're all trapped in the haunted house and we can't get out, and there's 10 of us, and that's the rule. I can go around, I can search the rooms and I can find things, and I've got an inventory. That's the rules, right? And maybe there's not a lot of safety, and maybe the surprises is every once in a while the killer comes and stabs somebody, right? Like that's the notion of a horror game, right? Where there's a lot more surprise and that undermines the safety. And that's like what makes the rules kind of like scary, right? And like you can see how just a simple tweak of that formula, and I've gone from kind of like humorous fun to kind of like horror, right? There's like ultimate cost, and therefore there's not a lot of safety. And so I very quickly can sort of speak to like, in this particular game or in this particular team, we're trying to be a research and development team. So safety is of utmost, right? And so I tend to watch out for the surprises that the team has to deal with, right? I try to shield them a little bit from a team standpoint. And from a play standpoint, I'm trying to say, okay, let's dial that back a little bit until like most of the surprise is actually surprise and delight and not worry or concern, unless occasionally we want to feather that in as part of an overall sort of experiential, kind of like pacing, right? And as far as like amusing and playful, I tend to sort of speak to 60% playful. What that really speaks to is that like all of the rules aren't completely spelled out. I've got a great, nice chunk of solid rules, but they're playful in that they kind of invite you to try and like break them, right? They're not rigid and complete and totally like thou shalt not, right? It's more like, hey, you know what? This is a good rule. This is a good rule. This is a good rule. And what that does is it tends to make people try and do that exploration. As long as you're now 30% comedy, as long as you're now helping show that it's okay to do all of that exploration, it tends to keep the wheel going, right?
Yeah, so it's like those 10 magic percents that you talked about. It's really cool. I think we have, if there is one last question, we have time for that, else our hour is running out. Let's see if someone has a question in the chat. Brian, thank you so much for preparing this talk, coming to us, talking to us. It's been super useful. Thank you. A big applause.
It's good to see you all. And if anybody has any questions, just holler.
Okay, I'll stop the recording now.
Okay, bye.
So, and then I'll just show you the room once more before. Okay, stop recording.